Hello everyone and welcome to the round glass review for the Canon EFS 24mm f2.8 Pancake lens. Oh, STM, I forgot the STM in that. Anyway, Canon introduced this lens in 2014 and it was made likely until near or at the end of the EFS production run some years later. Typical lens uses would be general use, travel, and street photography, as this lens is tiny and it has an angle of view approximately equivalent to a 38mm lens in full-frame terms. One sleeper use for this lens would be tabletop photography, as the close focus point and angle of view are highly useful in that setting. For your bottom line up front, for the Canon crop sensor DSLR user, this is a lens that is a near must for the camera bag. The image quality is excellent, size and weight are very reasonable, and the overall functionality is superb. Also, using an EF to RF adapter, this lens works well as a crop sensor format lens on Canon RF cameras. Your RF camera will, however, automatically switch to crop format with this lens mounted, and if I recall correctly, that is true of all Canon R cameras as of this video's recording. Now, that's a bit unfortunate, as the usable image circle on this lens extends a bit beyond the crop sensor format size, and as a lens to make 4x5 crops from full-frame images, this could be a promising performer. Your focal length and angle of view are 24mm and 59 degrees on APS-C. Aperture range is 2.8 through 22. Element and group count are 6 and 5. The design type is retro focus. Filter size 52mm. The closest focus point is 0.16 meters, which in the US is 1 Pizza Hut personal pan diameter. The drive type is autofocus with a manual focus switch on the lens. Manual focus is fly-by-wire. The native mount is Canon EFS. Dimensions are 68.2 by 22.8 millimeters, and the weight is a quite svelte 125 grams. For those curious, I've used this lens with the EOS Rebel T7, T5, and T6i, as well as the RF mount RP, R7, and R100. It worked well on all of them, but personally I like the images that the R100 produced the most, and the R7 was a close second. The point of that is to say that this lens pairs well today on RF and is a great option for RF crop sensor shooters. For your first real tip, a detraction. This lens will magenta fringe like the Dickens in high contrast settings when wider than f4. At f4 and smaller, the color fringing is largely tamed. Next up, to my eye, the image character coming out of this lens is pretty sterile. That is beneficial if you're someone who likes to edit and tweak images, and to that end, the images from this lens are definitely suitable for extensive manipulation and improvement. For some good points on this lens, the image circle exceeds what's needed on a crop sensor camera, so as we'll see in a couple of sections, light loss is minimal, and with periphery illumination correction activated on your Canon camera, the images that this lens produces are very even. As a note, none of the images in this video were shot with periphery illumination active. For those of you who like to shoot close, this lens has an exceptional close focus point, and that gives it some very good potential use for tabletop photography in some studio settings. Also makes it a very good general use lens whenever you're out taking photos. And lastly, when you shoot wide open and up close, the EFS 24mm can provide exceptional subject isolation, and that can be a good use for this lens if you have a small enough subject. I tested this lens on my Sony a7 IV in both full-frame and crop modes, so we'll see both performances in this section. Starting in APS-C, the DOTS test chart shows exceptional performance with very minor coma appearing at the image edges. This is a performance that's honestly better than I would have expected for a lens that is as affordable as this one. The full-frame sample is brightened a bit, as that helps to show that this lens is super sharp in the image center, and that it can capture the texture of my computer monitor quite well. With full frame, coma continues to increase beyond the APS-C image area until the full image circle is reached. Now that said, the coma levels on this lens outside of the designed image area are far better than very many of the lenses I've reviewed in this series, so Well done on that, Canon. As an illustration, this last test chart graphic shows the full frame image with the APS-C area and image circle periphery outlined. If you have a camera that can use this lens's full image circle on full frame, this would be a suitable lens for 4x5 image crops that could be some fun to experiment with. Testing some bokeh balls, here first at infinity focus and then the next image at close focus. At infinity focus, the lens has the cat eye bokeh that all lenses have to some degree. As the stars test in two sections will show, these spots change shape uniformly as the lens is stopped down, which demonstrates that the cat eye shape is solely due to projection angle and that this lens has no mechanical vignette in the image circle on a crop sensor body. Focused at the closest focus point, the lens exhibits very slight spherical aberration over correction at close focus. This leads to a brighter blurry area perimeter at source point lights, and that can be used to some creative effect. This also explains why some of the up-close photos in this video have slightly jittery blurry areas. Blurry areas with brighter perimeters, that is, the circles of confusion from that, do not blend together smoothly. And one last item in this close focus shot that you can see, the blurry balls exhibit the milling traces of the aspherical lens mold production process. That's not a flaw in that it's something that's necessarily wrong with the lens. It's a holdover from the way that the molds for the aspherical glass, which is poured into molds, were milled, and it shows that the molds were not smoothened after milling on a lathe, so that's just part and parcel to the lens's fingerprint. We know this is a retrofocus lens because of the effective focal length of 24mm, though the lens was designed for cameras with a flange focal distance of 44mm. A non-retrofocus 24mm lens at 44mm from the sensor would be close to 1:1 magnification just for being mounted. Anyway, this is also a really neat design because of how it shows that lenses of suitable maximum aperture and, honestly, stunning image quality can be absolutely tiny. Let us all raise our hands and shout out for a merciful release from the tyranny of enormous and heavy lens design. Breathing is noticeable and will be apparent in both still and motion focus shifts. An additional consideration for this, because this lens uses a fly-by-wire manual focus control, the focus acceleration and exact placement are hard to control. In short, this lens is not recommended for manual focus video use. The aperture is stepped in third stops and controlled on the camera. The front element is non-rotating but does move in and out by 8mm, which is 33% of the lens's focal length. The focus throw is not applicable exactly. I mean, there is a focus throw, but because the manual focus is fly-by-wire, I think also some of the Canon cameras allow for fine-tuning of that. There's no really easy way to gauge what the focus throw on this lens will be from infinity to nearest focus. Focus damping is non-existent because the ring is used to tell the STM to adjust the lens. The autofocus effect on audio is going to be noticeable with fast focus shifts, even with manual focus, as the lens's STM makes a faint whine that sounds a bit like a quiet flatbed scanner conveyor belt. Sharpness is exceptional in the center and very good through the intended image circle. This lens will certainly exceed the needs of almost every potential user. The build quality is solid and nice, and I have zero complaints in this department. Contrast is readily editable, and I think part of the overall image sterility that this lens yields is grounded in the image contrast being a slightly flat profile, especially in raw shooting. Aperture stars begin to form right away at f4, but never really take on good definition. This stems from the aperture blades being rounded. While that yields comparatively smooth, blurry areas as the lens stops down, it also means that aperture stars are just somewhat smeary blobs with hints of the 14-point stars they should have. Source point stars are not this lens's forte. Out-of-focus areas are pleasing at the wider apertures, and this stems from the way that coma is introduced near the image perimeter. Blurry areas have character, but it's not distracting. Distortion, when evaluating only the intended crop sensor image area, is well controlled for a lens of this price and grade. In general, It can be assumed that distortion will not ruin images, though it is noticeable if searched for on some of the photos in this video. On crop sensor cameras, light loss is pronounced wide open, significantly improved by f4 and gone by f5.6. Flare and ghosting never appeared in any photos I took with this lens over the last 3 years, even when I torture tested it with the sun. This is exceptional performance for any lens and far above expectations for a consumer-tier crop sensor lens. Balance with cameras is nice, as the lens' small size and weight keep the camera's center of gravity within the camera. This lens is quite nice to use on any camera. The Canon EFS 24mm f2.8 STM is a good reason to enjoy Canon EF and RF with an adapter, crop sensor cameras. This lens delivers stunning image quality across the frame and has only a handful of weaknesses, all of which are unimportant most of the time. Yes, the images come out a bit sterile, but the trade-off is that they provide a significant latitude when it comes to editing. For the Canon crop sensor users, this lens is one that will have a good place in your camera bag, and you would likely find yourself relying on it often. I can think of few better things to say about a piece of camera gear than this. It makes you want to use it because you know it will perform well.